We go to the phones, to the fun. Benjamin is listening in California. And Benjamin, you're on Free Talk Live with Ian and Mark. Appreciate you hanging through there, because I really wanted to make sure we had time to dig into what happened with you and your brother Russell over the last few days here in California, where you were in a trial up until it finished out, I guess, yesterday. For those of our listeners that don't know, what's the story behind this trial? Why were you in court? Go ahead and fill us in.
Sure. About a year ago, late April of last year, my brother and I went to a highway overpass with a sign we had made that was as large as 11 pieces of poster board all strung together, and it said, "Taxes equal theft." Police arrived on scene, presumably, I thought, because something was happening out of the ordinary, and they were curious. And then they started to tell us we had to take the sign down. I had the audacity to ask them if our sign was illegal. Their response was, "Well, we don't think so." And then they decided to take issue with the fact that we were wearing Guy Fawkes masks and saying that wearing a mask is illegal. They asked for our, this is the exact quote from the officer, "Do you happen to have your ID on you by chance?" And we said, "No, not on us," which was the absolute truth. We were not carrying IDs as we were out on a sidewalk. Mm-hmm. And then it spiraled out of control from there, with the police officers trying to insist on things and ask things and argue with us about the content of our sign, and telling us we couldn't film the entire encounter, which we were doing from a couple angles.
Yes, so you did get video footage of this, and it is available on your YouTube channel. Now, what's the best? Is it your Good Men Do Something at FR33 Agents? Is that your best place we can point listeners to?
People can go to just goodmendosomething.org.
Okay.
And from there, they can go to our Facebook or our, YouTube, or we have everything through there.
Perfect. So you've got a sign, you're holding it on a highway overpass. The police decide they're going to come mess with you. They come over. They don't like the fact that you're wearing masks. They don't like the fact that you're holding up a sign that says taxes equal theft. They want to argue with you about the sign. They want to ask you questions, and you weren't necessarily forthcoming with answers, right?
Well, I didn't. I thought they were just, asking general questions, and so I decided, no thanks. I don't want to. I don't want to answer questions.
Right. You have no obligation to answer their questions. You're just a man on the side of the street holding a sign. And right. What obligation could you possibly have to answer their questions? Last I heard, when a cop approaches you on the street, and again, I'm no lawyer, but when a cop approaches you on the street and starts asking you things, you don't have to answer his questions. I mean, if he wants to arrest you for some alleged crime, then he can do that. But you still aren't under any obligation to answer his questions.
I think you've got to give your name or something.
That's not necessarily true, right? In different places.
Here in California, at least, and this is all I know, is if you are being detained, right, they suspect you of having committed a crime, or you're about to commit a crime or whatever, or they put you in handcuffs, they need to ticket you, whatever, they can hold you until they can identify you. Obviously, the easiest way is for you to give them your name, mm-hmm. but they hold you until they can identify you so they can write, who is it they're ticketing, kind of thing, or who is it they have arrested before they release you. Who is it they has to be called back to court, kind of thing.
Right.
So they arrested us for wearing masks. When we went, at that time, obviously, we're being detained, and when they took us to the police station, we gave them our names and birth dates or whatever so they could verify who we are. And by the time we got out of the jail, we were being charged with having an illegal sign affixed to state property, which is only meant for, you can't go around and put up your banner, and bolt it to a highway overpass saying,
right, like if you're, for instance, those sorts of laws are mostly made for, like,
posting handbills.
Yeah, like the local painter wants to go and put up painting signs all over the place. That's not acceptable. So that's where that comes from.
Not even applicable.
Yeah.
But that's not even what we ended up being convicted of, because they dropped the sign charge, they dropped the mask charge, and instead what they decided to go with is a resisting/obstructing charge because we, quote, delayed the officers in their investigation.
Delayed the officers in their investigation.
Right, because when the officer asked us, do you happen to have your ID on you by chance? Which doesn't sound like, give me your ID, right?
Yeah.
we had the audacity to tell them the truth. No, not on us.
And so, therefore, because you weren't carrying government ID and weren't willing to hand it over to them,
you answered his question directly, though.
They charged you with obstructing justice.
Right. His question wasn't, may I have your ID? Which, I don't know that's still a yes/no question, and whatever. I don't think that's obstructing either. But his question was, do you by chance have it on you? So the answer to that question was no. I mean, answering that question with yes would have also been delaying because you're lying to the man. None of these.
Well, the idea is you were delaying the officer because you aren't a good little citizen. You don't carry your ID on you at all times.
He's not driving the sidewalk. He doesn't need to have a driver's license.
Apparently you do, Mark. They're looking at a year in jail over this.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Well, no, they're not looking at a year in jail because they did anything wrong. They're looking at a year in jail because a bunch of amateurs called a jury.
I didn't say they did anything.
Bent their
Hold
will.
on. I didn't say they did anything wrong. I'm just saying that according to this jury's decision, you have to have an ID on you at all times in California if you're an activist. Otherwise, you're obstructing justice.
Not only does the jury not understand the law in this circumstance, they don't even understand common sense. I mean, the guy asked him a question, they gave the truthful answer to the question, and they're calling it delaying.
Right. Well, and I want to be really clear. I do not believe the officers woke up that day and said, how are we going to mess with these guys?
Benjamin, hold that thought. Can you stick with us and talk further on this matter?
Absolutely.
All right, great. More with Benjamin here from goodmendosomething.org. That's the website. There's good information on there, plus the original video that he's talking about here, where you can see what happened. Goodmendosomething.org. We'll come back with more with Benjamin and find out what happened in court yesterday, because there's some outrageous quotes from these jurors you're going to want to hear. Free Talk Live. We've got Benjamin Bartholomew on the line here. He's one of the guys, one of the two brothers behind goodmendosomething.org. It's a site that they started at some point last year after being arrested on the side of the road. They were on an overpass in California holding a huge sign that read, "Taxes equal theft." And they had intended to go out and do some basically, outreach to get the taxes equals theft meme or idea out into people's minds. And that was all their intention was. They were wearing some V masks because, well, I don't know, I guess they wanted to wear some masks. And the cops didn't like that very much. So they showed up, and I think the cops would not have liked it whether they were wearing masks or not. They didn't like the idea that the suggestion was that their paychecks were funded through theft. So they actually came out and debated with the brothers about the issue of taxes and coercion and things like that. And it was all caught on video. They asked a number of questions and maybe didn't get the answers they were looking for, specifically sort of a question about whether or not they had identification on them. It wasn't said that the identification was required or anything like that. It was just asked of them if they had it, and they responded that they did not because they didn't. It wasn't a lie. And Benjamin is back with us here to talk more about the event as it happened, but also the trial that occurred yesterday, almost a year from the original arrests. And what all has transpired. Have I recapped appropriately, Benjamin?
Yeah.
So tell me more here. So you guys were arrested. They actually ended up dropping the being in public with masks on charge. They dropped the
because it didn't apply. It was intended for people that were trying to hide their identity, and you didn't hide your identity. You told them who you were.
Right. Even lifted the mask up at one point, showed them who you were. And so then they dropped that charge. They dropped the sign charge, and they hit you with another charge, which is essentially the equivalent of obstructing justice. They called it delaying an officer. When you actually look at the details on that law in California, it talks about obstructing. So it's a very similar charge to what I was charged with here in Keene, New Hampshire. But I sat in front of a police car. I literally did obstruct them, and I did so on purpose. When they were arresting a friend of mine, I decided to stand in the way of a police car. And I got charged essentially with the same crime. I got sentenced to a year in jail with 9 months suspended, 3 months actually in the pokey, ended up spending 2 on a good time thing, because here in New Hampshire it's 2/3 good time rule, so I was out after 2 months. But the idea that here in New Hampshire, I sit in front of a police car and essentially get the same criminal charge as you did when you did absolutely nothing intending to obstruct anybody. You're standing on the side of the road holding a sign, one of the most classic forms
and telling the truth when the officer asks you a question.
Right, and one of the most classic forms of protest that you can find in this country. Standing on the side of the road holding a sign. I mean, it doesn't get much more typical as far as protests than that does. It's just outrageous what happened to you.
So you had the jury trial. What happened?
Well, okay, so we have video of the entire encounter from the moment the first officer arrives on scene and asks his first question, which was, what does the sign say, to just like a couple seconds before they put handcuffs on us, because that's when the video ends. But the jury was only allowed to see the very first minute and about 10 or 15 seconds from the time the officer gets there till the time, he asks if we have our IDs on us by chance, essentially. So they don't know the entire context of what happened.
And what was the state's objection to showing the full video?
The judge, I'm not in the room where they're arguing this stuff, but to my understanding, the judge considered it hearsay because the portion that we were being charged with was that first, little section, and so what does the rest of it have to do with that first little bit? The obstructing portion comes there. What does the rest of it have to do with that? Kind of a thing.
Wow.
Why do they need to see what happened afterwards? Either we obstructed right there or we didn't. Which in some ways helped us just, and some ways didn't, obviously. I don't know. But, and the jurors were given really good instructions, because here's where it comes down to. If we were detained, the officer arrived, right, like we were waving around a gun, and detained us, and, had good reason to be asking us for our ID, and then we said no, then we had violated that law.
But you weren't detained.
But we weren't, according to the officer, we were detained. He said, hopefully we weren't able to record the trial, that's a whole other thing, But the officer, when he was questioned by our attorney, when did the detention start? The officer said, the moment I asked them for their ID, which makes no sense.
Yeah, that makes no sense, because you would have been, okay, so you're required to give your ID when you're detained. You haven't been told you're detained by any stretch of the imagination, and
they don't have to tell you
he
that.
didn't ask you for your ID. I mean, that wasn't the question. The question was, do you happen to, by chance, have your ID on you? The only answer that you could give him, because it's the only truthful one, is no. So, I mean, I don't understand how these mouth-breathing morons on the jury couldn't get this.
Well, and I feel bad saying that, because they were given such limited information.
Look, you can only be responsible to answer the questions that people ask you.
Or you could always answer the question with another question. Obviously, this is in hindsight.
Not in this circumstance.
Well, and
you could have said, whoa. You could have said, do I have an obligation to have ID on me?
I can tell you what the DA... Well, and here's the lesson learned, and I hope everybody out there learns this. I made the wrong assumption that these officers happened to be curious about something strange, because this doesn't normally happen in my area, happening in their area, and wanted to find out, hey, what's going on? And so I was willing to give them some information and answer some of their questions. The lesson learned here is, the moment a police officer comes up, you either keep your mouth shut, or you start off by asking, am I being detained? Am I being detained? Because we only asked if we were being detained or arrested towards the end, when it became clear that we were probably about to be detained or arrested, and they never answered us when we asked that. But don't answer questions from the police, no matter what, unless you ask them, am I being detained? Otherwise, this can happen to you. That's the lesson I've learned.
And if you're not being detained, then go ahead and pack up your sign and leave the scene. Would that be the right thing to do, do you think, in your case?
I wouldn't have. Well, it depends. For instance, looking back in hindsight, obviously, had the officers told me, hey, your sign is illegal, right? Maybe they didn't tell me a penal code or something, but they say, hey, specifically, and I have it on camera, your sign is illegal. I may have packed it up and said, okay, fine, I'll go home, and then I would have found out, oh, it's not illegal, and you lied to me. And then I can, go back with that. But I'm not going to debate law with them there. I don't want to, be arrested or anything.
Right.
I'll have them on camera saying something untruthful, and that'll be the end of it. But the officer said he didn't have a problem with our sign, and he didn't think it was against the law. So why would I have packed up my sign and left at that point?
Yeah.
Yeah, none of it makes any sense at all. So
essentially what the jury has done here is made California a stop and ID state, that the police officer can see people going down the street and decide he wants to ID them just in case, and you have to.
Yeah, and if you don't have your ID, it's obstructing. Benjamin, hang on. Would like to continue this conversation. Do you have time?
Yep.
More coming up here. 855-450-FREE, SACL's CAI toll-free line. Maybe you have a question for Benjamin and what's about what his situation is. I want to read some of these quotes from the jurors that are cited in this newspaper article about it. It's absolutely outrageous. Coming up, Free Talk Live. We have Benjamin on with us here from California. He's Benjamin Bartholomew, one of the Bartholomew brothers, who have been both charged with the dastardly crime of standing alongside the road and holding a sign. Well, that's actually not the name of the charge. That's what they were doing at the time that they were arrested, was holding a taxes equals theft sign on an overpass. They weren't obstructing any traffic or getting in anyone's way. Just holding a sign is, should be a right to do as a supposedly free person who has freedom of speech and, the right to assemble and all that stuff. So that's what they were doing. The cops stopped. They asked them some questions. The guys were wearing V masks at that time. They were more than happy to raise their masks to show their identity, to show they weren't trying to conceal their identities. But when asked for identification, or asked if they happened to have identification on them, I think was what the question was from the police officer, they answered truthfully. The answer was no. And it ended up being that's what they were charged with, was a so-called crime of delaying a police officer. It's also known as obstructing justice. The suggestion being that because they didn't have government ID on them, that therefore the police officers had a more difficult time ascertaining who they were. And so therefore, that's a criminal act according to the state of California, and they need to be looking at a year in jail and a $1,000 fine because of it. And apparently the jury agrees with the state of California. Let me give you some excerpts here. We'll bring Benjamin back on to comment on these. But this is from the Appeal Democrat, which is apparently the local newspaper there in Yuba County, California, appeal-democrat.com. Juror Roman Ontiveros said the jury believed the brothers should have simply cooperated with Yuba County Sheriff's Deputy Kenny Sulls when questioned last year. Ontiveros, the juror, said, quote, "I think the brothers should have just let it go. The bigger issue of free speech is a hot topic. It's important to think about. But at some point, we all need to watch where we walk."
The hell does that mean?
That's what I'd like to know. Benjamin, in California, you're still on with us here from goodmendosomething.org. What does it mean when he says we all need to watch where we walk?
Well, like I said, the jurors only got limited information. But essentially, what I think this shows is that the system as a whole has done a very good job of conditioning people to believe that if an officer asks you something, no matter what it is, you need to tell them.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what the circumstances are, you need to tell them, or else you're doing something quote-unquote wrong.
Right.
You'd think if it was a law that you had to carry an ID, that there would be a law that you had to carry an ID.
But
that the legislators of the great state of California would have gotten together and voted at least in a majority, if not in a supermajority, and said, yes, every citizen in the state of California must have an ID on them. And they must produce it in the first moment that they're asked for it. But this is just a new law created by the
jury.
The prosecution and with the jury completely complicit in this.
And people that look at the police state and how there have been more and more, intrusions into our privacy and our personal lives by the police departments around the country, it's not a surprise to see things going in this direction. This is what the police ultimately want. They want you to have your papers on you at all times so you can be easily identified and snatched up if there's a warrant out for you or whatever. They're going to have their excuses for this. And so I'm sure the police department is just absolutely loving this. This wasn't a law. It still isn't a law.
It was never
passed.
But now it's precedent.
It is. Right. Now it's precedent in the court. And so effectively it has become a law. And, of course, you guys didn't know it. It wasn't a law before your trial.
But wait a second. You guys had an attorney. What'd you pay for an attorney? I mean, was this not brought up?
No, it was all brought up.
The jury just didn't seem to care,
including the fact that the officer claimed to have been investigating us for wearing a mask illegally and a sign, he admitted that, those weren't against the law, and he knows better now, and he should have known.
The officer admitted on the stand that you weren't breaking those laws and he should have known better?
Yeah.
But no, we'll go ahead and charge him with something else entirely, this nonsense obstructing charge for not having identification on them.
Yeah.
Because we can't possibly admit we were completely wrong, because in government, being in government means you don't have to say you're sorry.
Apparently you don't.
And now you're facing a year in jail. Another quote from a juror, if I may, here. Ontiveros, again, this is the same juror that we quoted earlier, said the jury's decision was easy and said the brothers should have used better judgment when dealing with law enforcement. Don't you know, Benjamin, that if you don't do what the cops say, you're going to go to jail? We'll teach you a lesson, buddy.
They didn't even say it. This is what baffles the crap out of me. The cops didn't say, son, give me your ID, or son, where is your ID? They said, do you, by chance, happen to have your ID on you? There is only one way for them to have answered that, and that's no.
Apparently it doesn't matter how it's said. They'll just do
right,
whatever
it's an
they want.
intimation.
Rick Daugherty, D-A-U-G-H-E-R-T-Y, Daugherty, another juror, said the only difficulty he had voting to convict was the fact that as a Wheatland resident himself, he knows the family. Now, I'm not sure if you're supposed to be allowed on a jury if you know the person who's at the trial, but nonetheless, he said he believes the Bartholomews are good kids and from a wonderful family. That was his only issue in voting guilty. But he goes on to say, we felt they should have cooperated with the officer. They were told they were doing two things wrong and were asked for their identification. Whether or not, let's see here, whether or not it was true, we felt they should have cooperated. And what he's talking about there
that they were doing something wrong.
Right, whether or not the cops were right.
Actually, the cops were doing something wrong for trying to stop somebody from doing something wrong that wasn't wrong. However, those people that weren't wrong were wrong for not having cooperated with, supposedly cooperated with a police officer.
Right.
I mean, it's insane. What kind of gas were they pumping into this jury room? And I'll tell you what, it's the same gas they pump into every jury room, because there's no gas. It's just normal human behavior and the way that they bow to authority.
State educated, state indoctrinated, raised by the state. I mean, these people, the state media and influencing them throughout their whole lives. These people had the opportunity to set you guys free from this nonsense, and they just went in lockstep with whatever the state people wanted, despite this just ludicrous case.
This is what confuses me. You mentioned what did my lawyer bring up and all that, and that all got brought up. And even the judge, part of the judge's instructions was clearly setting out all the elements that had to be proven. And so they were so quick, I was like, oh, cool, I guess we must have won.
Oh, man.
Because here's the thing. The jury instructions, I forget how many it is. It's like 23 pages of stuff, including several pages of them saying, okay, X, Y, and Z have to happen plus Q if you're going to convict on this. Mm-hmm. Which, based on the jury instructions, that I was like, well, there's no way they can't possibly do it. So they clearly just heard the jury instructions, didn't bother to double check the jury instructions. As far as I'm concerned, they went in there and said, oh, yeah, they're guilty. Look,
these bad little boys didn't do what they were told. The teacher came out and told them what to do, and they didn't do it, so they're bad. I mean, that's the kind of simple-minded stuff they did. And I've seen it over and over and over again, where juries don't pay any attention to the obligation, quote-unquote, that they have as a juror. They just, I mean, it's just amazing to me.
Prosecutor, district attorney says, we've always said this was never about the First Amendment. Protest to the legislators, not the blue-collar cop just doing his job. He can't do anything about it anyway, said the prosecutor. You don't pick on the help. You go to the boss.
Pick on the help? This is so stupid. I mean,
this baffles me.
They answered the question.
We didn't go to the cops.
Right.
It's not like we went to the police station and said, hey, did you know taxes equal theft and you're the enforcement arm of this? We were out there, and they came to us.
Yep.
That really baffles me. And, oh, by the way, when we do our activism, we do it in our county, Yuba County, then in the local counties, Sutter County, Placer County, and Sac County. We do protest in Sac County. So we already do anyway. That quote really bothered me.
I know you guys are looking at up to a year in jail. You think that the judge is on your side, according to our conversation off the air, and so we'll see what the actual penalty is. It's your first time being convicted of something, yes?
Correct.
So that's going to be in your favor. Hopefully you'll end up just with a suspended sentence so you can get the hell out of California, and because I know you guys are both Free State Project participants, right?
No, absolutely.
Because if they give you probation, then you're likely going to be stuck there, as usually terms of probation are that you can't leave the state. So hopefully you'll end up with just, a small fine and suspended sentence. Are you planning on appealing this?
Oh, yeah.
How much have you spent on the lawyer so far?
So far, just our retainer, and that's it.
And that is?
Several $1,000s.
Several $1,000s. Benjamin, keep us in the loop, will you?
Absolutely.
Thanks for the call tonight. Appreciate it. Goodmendosomething.org, their website. More coming up. This is Free Talk Live.